Today I'm joined by someone who's very interesting in my eyes, whose journey began by storytelling, editing children's magazine, Tinkle, if my research is correct. And then she moved to different parts of the world and did very interesting things like being a part of beauty pageant to winning it to filmmaking and eventually returning to university and studying ancient history and archaeology. And today she creates research driven cultural history content on her page in Instagram, where I met her, live, laugh, learn. And she also has some really great articles, which we will touch upon in the Medium platform. So, welcome to the podcast, Anvita Sudarshan.
Thank you so much. That was a very kind intro. And
Have I missed anything?
I'm,
Is it
no, you've covered the major milestones.
okay? Let's then go to the very interesting topic in my head. I'm currently reading a book. It's called "The Ape That Understood the Universe," and in that book there is a line which I found or which stuck with me. It mentions that evolution isn't survival of fittest, but it's the survival of the beauty. Um, when there is a beauty finds a way to propagate genes, and that's why I wanted to start the conversation here. How do you define beauty?
Okay, so firstly, I do disagree with the quote that you just quoted, but I'll come back to that after I get to my definition of beauty. So, in my opinion, and this is just an educated opinion, uh, there are three broad categories of defining beauty. And firstly, you have your biological sense of how you perceive beauty. Beauty is what pushes the propagation of certain biological traits onto the next generation. So, in that sense, it doesn't really go against survival of the fittest. If you're taking, for example, fast running as a desirable trait, in that case, as someone who's able to sprint really fast would be seen as beautiful. And that would lead to the propagation of that particular trait. So it is survival of the fittest. It's just not in the exact same sense as we have traditionally been defining it, perhaps. But then comes the second layer. And the second layer is a cultural sense of how we see beauty. You have fair skin. Fair skin does not serve any biological purpose whatsoever, except if you're living in certain temperate zones. Especially if you look at the Indian subcontinent, it's only in the last 200 or 300 years that we have preferred fair skin. Before that, our standard of beauty was dark skin. And fair skin has been preferred for the last maybe 2 or 3 centuries, primarily because it is seen as socially upward. It leads to a social upward mobility, really. And that's very cultural. That's got nothing to do with your biological propagation of certain traits. It's all about how you want to be perceived socially. Then comes a third layer, which is a very personal, individualistic sense of what you find beautiful. And this is where beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Because someone might like curly hair, someone might like straight hair, and usually, from what I've observed, at least, it's to do with what you don't have. Someone who's always had straight hair might find curly hair very pretty. Someone who's always had, someone who's who's very slender might prefer a bigger bone frame, or vice versa. It's very personal. It's dependent on what you have versus what you don't have.
Mm. So it's
So,
very
yeah.
so the definition of beauty would be very subjective to that individual, and it's more like an experience that gets awakened within you when you see something that you like, or when you see something that could be mathematically aligned, like with a golden ratio, or could be symmetrical. but also culturally aligned, or uh, might not be culturally aligned, something that is your own preference, I guess. So it's very subjective experience is what I hear from you. I don't
Yes
like to
and no, actually.
make a lot of sense in the points that you're saying. Um, but I was also like thinking from a different species point of view, like peacocks, right? They try to
Mhm.
spread their feathers and try to attract the other sex, mainly because of the color of their feathers. And that if that color of the feather is not as elegant or not as beautiful, the other sex would choose someone else. So there is,
True.
like, from the other sex point of view, they are seeing this specific male peacock to be showing off its beauty. And that's what, in my head,
True.
I was like, if that is the reason for propagation of gene for that specific species, then beauty has some part to play in it.
Hmm.
Um,
See, we also define it as beautiful because that is what biology has hardwired us to think. If that did not exist, would we really define it as beautiful or not? We don't know that.
mm,
If left up to simply cultural and personal preferences, we don't
mm,
know if we would define it as beautiful or not.
mm. But those are quite in-depth breakdown of
Mhm.
what beauty is. I've not thought it like that. But that's very interesting, Stan. Um, if we move from this topic and try to go to history, when
Mhm.
you were in beauty pageant, I assume that you had certain identity of yourself in your mind. And when you started studying uh, ancient history, or starting creating this content, did something within you change, um, or did your identity change in some ways based on which you said, okay, I want to move from the beauty part to learning about ancient history and to creating more content related to it?
So, firstly, the transition wasn't as sudden.
Okay.
And it's also a question I get asked quite a bit, in fact.
Mm,
Thing is, all these things have always been part of the identity.
mm,
It's only about what comes out at certain aspects at certain times.
mm,
And so the beauty pageants thing, I did what, it's been 12, 13, 14 years since then, in fact.
mm,
A whole lifetime has gone by, in the sense of speaking, since then. And I did that for a certain purpose at the same time. Firstly, when I started doing it, I did it because it was good for my career. I was a model, I was an actor, and this was the way for me to get forward with it. And then I started doing it because I failed at it.
mm,
So there was a whole sense of, wait, why can't I do this? I need to crack this code. So that's what led me to win a couple of beauty pageants, because now I needed to figure out what I was doing wrong. It was just a personal, very personal mission. And history did not come immediately after that. History has always been somewhere in the back for me. If I hadn't gotten into acting, which is a whole different story, in fact, uh, right out of school, in fact, I got into acting. But if I hadn't gotten into that, I would have gone on to study ancient history at university.
mm,
That was always that's what I was looking to do, but life took me down a certain path. So even after beauty pageants in 2012, in fact, I studied filmmaking. I did my master's in filmmaking because I wanted to, well, now start telling the stories that be behind the camera rather than just be in front of the camera. These are all different aspects of storytelling, and I wanted to experience every single aspect of storytelling. So from there, I went into screenwriting. I did NFTC Screenwriter Studio, whatnot, and I decided at one point in my late 20s that I wanted to just tell my own stories. So I took a break for a year, which then decided I was already thinking of moving to Mysore at that time because Bombay was getting a bit too much for me. It's honestly, lifestyle wise, it's not a great city to live in. There are many who would disagree with me, but that's just my personal opinion. And so I did want to move to a city that would be better for me mentally and physically. It would be healthier. And I figured since I'm getting into my own writing, there's no time like now to make that shift. And perhaps I thought I could divide my time between Mumbai and Mysore. And then COVID happened.
Mm.
So in Mysore, well, my parents had settled here post retirement, and my mother was already running an organic farm at that time. So I obviously got involved in that. That took me down a certain route. And yeah, one thing leads to the other. And at certain times, you feel like, wait, this is what I wanted to do back then. So why don't I do it right now?
Mm.
So that's the journey from beauty to history. It's not linear. It doesn't make sense. But it's not a switch either. It's just a very gradual progression.
I mean, it does make sense, at least for me, because I'm also in that path of I'm working in the IT industry, but I'm still
Huh.
doing this eccentric thing of being a
Yeah.
host podcast. And I wanted to do this for a long time, 2018, 2019, but never got an kick to say.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, someone like poked me and said, "What is that you actually want to do as a
Yeah.
passion?" And that inspired me to this path. So I can understand when you say that
Yeah.
you always wanted to do this. It was like you were very curious about learning ancient history, I would assume, and that curiosity like kind of drove you to this path. And is there any moment in the ancient history that when you're reading about it and when you're studying about ancient history that has helped you in current day decision making? Because history is something that people read and try to learn from it and implement it in the current day. We don't want to make the same mistakes that our ancestors made, right? So is there something that you learned while reading this uh, wherein you said, oh, this is so smart, I've never thought about it, let me try to apply it in my current day or current life?
Not a specific moment, but just a general thing. So this is what I learned when I was studying history in high school as well, because that's what your teachers always told you, that you study history in order to learn from it and not to make the same mistakes as mistakes that have already been made.
Mm.
But the more you study history, the more you read about the lives that people have lived or the societies that existed, the way people have lived, there is no way to learn from that. They did what they did at a certain point of time because they felt that was right for them. You can't judge it. You can't learn from it. Because if you were in that position, chances are you would have probably done the same thing.
Mm.
There are many aspects of, culture, of society, and of your own internal ambitions or whatever it is. There are thousands of different aspects that influence your decision making at any given point. And when I realized this was actually one of my latest videos on the female archers who formed part of the security detail of Chandragupta Maurya.
Mm.
And there was a comment in that said that I don't know if this is empowerment or if it was misogyny.
Mm.
And that's a very valid point. Looking at it from today's perspective, that is a very valid point. But we also had to remember that the Mauryan world was not the same as the world that we live in.
Mm.
Firstly, we have to see if empowerment was truly an issue at the time or if survival was an issue. Empowerment only comes into being an issue once your basic survival is taken care of. So we're looking into that. We're looking into social dynamics. We're looking into how gender dynamics worked at that time. What was considered acceptable? What was not considered acceptable? Empowerment also depends on that. Our modern sense of empowerment, especially female empowerment or whatever it is, happens because we have seen an immediate 2 or 3 generations that have suffered immensely. Did they also see that? If they did not see that, to that extent at least, they would not have carried on the same feeling that we do today.
Mm.
For example, just 150 years ago, when Savitribai Phule was trying to educate girls, when she's walking to the school, people would throw cow dung at her. That is our immediate history. That is what we're trying to recover from, and that is why we focus so much on misogyny and empowerment. But at that time, was that the case? We don't know yet. It could be, it might not be. They might have asked the same questions, but the amount of data we have to come to that conclusion in order to effectively learn from that is so little
Mm.
that
Don't we
it
have
just
don't we have books, or don't we have writings from those eras which talks about how women at that point in time lived, and were they educated, or did they learn the art of fighting, things like those? Is it not captured in the books, or is it something that is lost when the libraries were burnt? Or um, yeah, what's your take on that?
to an extent it is. There's no
Mm,
doubt about that. For example, just the fact that you have female bodyguards shows that women did uh, learn how to fight. They did. There was a certain physical education at the very least.
mm,
You do know that. And we do know that women also learned perhaps the 64 arts and crafts that men were taught.
mm,
There is a certain amount of equality over there. But at the same time, there are also gender rules. And that is something I don't think I've seen a single society get over that, to be very honest, so far. I don't think that the degree of it can differ, but a complete annihilation of that, I don't think I've ever seen.
mm,
And on top of it, in Indian history specifically, so little research has been done for any time period that you get some very confusing interpretations just because of lack of research. And we have a large section of academia that our academia is really divided into two parts. One that wants to say that, hey, everything we did back then was so great. And one that wants to bring everything down to absolute nitty gritties to a point that it just doesn't link to each other anymore.
mm.
The truth is somewhere in the middle, really speaking. But we have not gotten to that point yet.
And what is needed is that certain change in the policies that needs to be done for education system, or for the research um, candidates to start looking at objectively like what you are saying, or is it a very difficult task ahead of Indian researchers?
It is a difficult task, but at the same, I don't think we need a change in policies.
Mm,
What we do need is a change in education for sure, because since a very young age, we are taught that the teacher, whatever the teacher says, is absolutely right. So we don't question. We grow up with a feeling of not questioning. And when we do question, we take it to a whole new extreme. We don't learn the middle path of dissent.
mm,
So, and history at the very least, I was lucky enough to at least spend a few years in a completely different education system that taught me very differently.
mm,
That taught me how to evaluate sources. That taught me how not to just say this. History is not just this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's a puzzle that you try to piece together, and no two people will piece it together the exact same way. If I give you the same set of sources and if I take the same set of sources, we will not see it the same way because our lives have been different. The way we see things are different. And that's also important because those little points of difference will ultimately give a collectively whole picture. That is what we don't learn in high school, though. What we
that is
learn in
true.
high school is this happens, then this happens, then this happens.
And it's also very true that we have a huge respect for the teaching authorities in India. We should, but like you said, questioning back and challenging the ideas is something that is not very much encouraged. That's also because we see teachers as like godly figures, and whatever they say is something that has to be accepted. Same with whatever is said at home. Even if it's wrong, it's something that you have to accept because that's the way the culture is set up. Um, which
And just to interject there, I don't think that has been the culture for a very long time. I think that's a recent development.
Mm,
Because if you look at older texts, there's always a sense of questioning. Even God is questioned.
mm,
If you look at Shankaracharya's texts, if you look at Madhvacharya's texts, well, not Madhvacharya so much, but Shankaracharya or any of your
Bhagavad Gita, for
thinkers, and yeah, Bhagavad Gita is a brilliant example.
mm,
God is always questioned.
mm,
It's only I don't know when this is, because I have not studied recent history as much as I studied
mm,
older history, but it's a recent development.
mm. Could be because of different cultures that w- either attacked India or was ruling India at that
Absolutely.
point in time. Maybe changed the way in
Absolutely.
which um, I always had that question about Ghungat in the north side of
Mm,
India. There is a culture where you always have to wear ghungat, but in south side of India, that culture is not very
that does not
prevalent, right?
exist.
And that could be because of, I don't know. If have you read about it? Is there ancient texts which talk about ghungat, or is it very recent development?
There is one that I have read, that I read off. I have not read this particular text though. So I think this is from the Lalita Vistara, which talks about the life of Buddha.
Mm,
In that, his wife is referred to as Gopa, not as Yashodhara. Yashodhara is the name we commonly know her with, but in that text, her name is Gopa, and she talks against the practice of avaguntana. Avaguntana is a veil on the head.
mm,
So, to some extent, probably did exist,
mm,
but perhaps not to the widespread extent that we have today, because these are texts that are, uh, well, they're sprinkled, really. They're not, it doesn't seem to be part of mainstream society. Because when you look at your sculptures, when you look at other texts, they don't mention it. But certain texts do. So there does seem to be a culture from places. Certain cultures did practice it, perhaps, but not as a widespread uh, blanket custom that we see in North India to a large extent today.
mm. If we do a mind experiment, and if we talk about, let's say you had the ability to go back in time, right? Which specific part of the Indian history, or any history for that matter, would you like to observe?
That's a tough one, actually. That's a very tough one. I don't know. Maybe I would like to go back to when the first urbanization was still happening, just prior Harappa.
Mm,
So just to see what were the cultural changes and what was it that drove these people to start building not fortified cities, but cities of brick and mortar. And yeah,
also,
maybe that. I don't know.
also the first civilization or the first race, I don't know how to say it correctly, to build sewage systems, to have waste
Exactly.
management systems. So they were highly intellectual people. And that
Exactly.
was that like 6,000, 10,000 years ago, or how? I don't have
Not
a.
10,000. That was around 5 to 6,000 years ago.
Mm,
The earliest layers around 4,000 BC ish.
mm,
So around the earliest layers come from 6,000 years ago.
mm. And for me, I, I I am very curious to understand some of the great architectures that were built in the Indian era. I don't know which era is it
Yeah.
exactly. Like there is the Kailasha temple, which is like
Yeah.
carved with one stone, right? I am
Yeah.
fascinated to understand what was the technology that they
Yeah.
used back then, and what was the thought process to say, okay, we have one massive stone and we start sculpting it from the top and reach at the end of the stone, and then we will have a
Yeah.
temple. That, if I don't know the timeline for it, but if I get the chance, I would definitely want to go and start surveilling. What are they doing? How are they
Yeah.
doing? Like, get that should be in one of the wonders of the world. I assume, right?
It should. It
Uh,
should.
it's a, I don't know. It's because of the lack of publicity, or what would get that into the wonder of the world is something that I don't know. For me, it is in my
I
head. It's
think
wonder of the world.
Yeah, I think a little bit of political lobbying would help in that sense. But because the wonders of the world are ultimately political to a
Hmm.
large extent. So a bit of political lobbying would probably be what is needed in that sense.
And if we reverse this, and if we say, if if we go 1,000 years ahead, obviously we can go.
Mm.
There's some people 1,000 years ahead, but they are looking back at us, at the current
Yeah,
day civilization. What would they find interesting, and what would they find stupid? Like, we missed this.
I don't know. I don't know if they would find anything that much out of the ordinary, to be very honest. Apart from the scale of industrialization that has happened, they would probably find interesting, because I
Hmm.
don't think that has ever happened in history.
Hmm.
The fact that most of us are living much more secure and comfortable lives than any person has in history is also perhaps that we are missing, but would be very obvious for a historian looking backward. But apart from that, I'm not sure. We are pretty much behaving like any other civilization ever has.
Hmm.
We are fighting about the same things. We get along with each other sometimes. We don't get along with each other at certain times. We're basically the same people. There's
I
not
would,
much difference.
if I was 1,000 years ahead and I was looking back, it would be the same question for me. Like, the utilization of energy, we are not very effective like the current generation at
Yeah,
utilization of energy. And what I mean is, we have powers like nuclear energy, right? But we are still relying on coal. We are still relying on fossil
yeah,
fuels. So there, people who are like 1,000 years ahead, looking back, would be like, they already had nuclear power. They could have utilized it in an effective way, but they missed that, and they're still using petrol or coal or whatever it is. So for me, it was like a
yeah,
surprise. Why is it not a universally developed system wherein we are all utilizing nuclear energy? I would consider that to
yeah.
be a huge miss for people who are 1,000 years ahead. Um, okay.
That's definitely part of it. Sorry, you were saying.
No. Continue.
No, that's definitely part of it. Or maybe they would also see it as just because we tend to look at our lives as this one large thing, but from a historical perspective, 100 years is actually nothing.
Mm,
So they might see it as a step for of the evolution of energy usage. It might not be as apparent to them as it is to us today, because for us, our lives are enlarged. It's what we're living.
mm,
But when you look at it from a historical perspective, uh, Chandragupta Maurya happened, then Bindusara happened, then Ashoka happened. It's all happened within the same chapter for us.
mm,
250 years, all within the same chapter. It's all minimized. History has a tendency to really minimize things.
mm,
So I don't know if it would be as obvious to them as it should be to us.
mm. It's
But another thing that, sorry, please.
no. Continue.
But another thing that perhaps could be interesting to a future historian is that we're actually living in a blip, in fact, a very uncommon blip of time. And we're very lucky in that sense. Most of us have not, even though we have lived through wars, we have not experienced war.
Mm,
For a large part of history, that's not the case. War comes to your doorstep. We have, in our lifetimes itself, we have lived through multiple wars, whether it's the Iraq War or whether it's a Kargil War or what, multiple wars. It's never reached our doorstep until and unless we're living in that exact position. That has not been the case for most of history. So that is a weird blip of time that we're living in. It's very uncommon. And that is something we don't realize. But
mm,
a future historian probably would.
mm. So when back in the days, let's say when Ramayana or when Mahabharata happened, would that be when that war happened? Would the entire India get affected by that war because
Well,
everyone was a part of it?
Mahabharata was a whole subcontinent war.
Mm,
Ramayana was not, but at the same time, we're not talking about just the major wars. We're talking about smaller battles as well.
mm,
If you look at the time period between, if you, for example, take the Vijayanagara Empire, Krishnadev Raya's time, in his lifetime, he has captured the Raichur Doab, then lost it, and then captured it again. At least, then this whole thing has happened at least 2 or 3 times.
mm,
And at this point of time, this is also probably because we have such a large population today and we didn't back then. Every able bodied person would have been called out to the army.
mm. That is true. That happens
Every,
in different parts of the world. India is like a very unique country in that regards because we have so much population that not every able man would be called into the army because we have so many people in the army that countries like Denmark or countries like many countries in Europe, it is a compulsory that if the country goes into a war, all the able-bodied
Hmm,
men would be fighting the war. And at that point in time, you would have war in your doorsteps. But
true,
in
true.
India, we are like privileged that we have such a big
That is true.
population that we
That is
don't
true.
see the impact of war um,
Yeah.
coming into our doorsteps. Um, if we slightly change the topic and go into the video that or the content that you shared on Supravat, I found it very interesting because growing up, I heard this Kaushalya, Supraja, Ramapurvasa. I heard
Yeah.
this a lot. My mother used to always play it at home, and I used to always relate it as okay. It's I have to get up now. It's time to get up, but it was a very soothing voice from Subbalakshmi. Um,
Yeah.
and it whenever it's still been played I can recollect all those old memories of me waking up and being a bit grumpy like I want to sleep a bit more, but
Yeah.
what why is Suprabhat such a massive hit or a viral moment in South Indian history mainly, I would guess, right?
I really don't have an answer to that, in
Mm,
fact. Uh, I don't know if it always was.
mm,
Suprabhata itself has been a very important part of Hindu culture. That's how you wake up divinity. So every neighborhood with a temple, perhaps once upon a time, would have had a certain Suprabhata going on in the morning. Of course, this speakers are very recent developments. So it would not have been on speakers. It would have been just in person. And perhaps oh, we would, especially in South India, we would have, this would have been very frequent with different types of Suprabhatas in different neighborhoods where different temples are there. Because there's more than about 300 Suprabhatas. Every god has their own Suprabhata. Even Jesus has a Suprabhata, by the way, if you Google it. There is a Yeshu Suprabhata.
this is great information. Jesus as Suprabhat. But what is it called? What did it say? I will Google it now.
Yeshu Suprabhata.
Yeshu Suprabhata. Is that someone telling Jesus to get up? His mother or
It is. It is.
that
I don't
is
know how commonly it's used, but it exists. Someone has actually written that. A few versions of it, in fact. So, in southern India, that has been a part of mainstream Hindu culture for a long time, for at least 400 or 500 years. This Suprabhata was written 600 years ago. So I would say 400 or 500 years because it takes time for something to catch on.
mm,
But the process of waking a divinity up is much older than that. It goes back to your agamas. And that would have been a culture that exists throughout the subcontinent. Maybe it might have gotten diluted in northern India due to a lot of intermingling and invasions. It might have gotten diluted there. I don't know. I'm just making a very blanket statement of the top of my head over here right now. But also, since the Venkatesha Suprabhata was written in South India, maybe it infiltrated the southern part of the country a lot more. That's also a possibility. So, but most probably what has also happened is once MS Subbulakshmi recorded this and it came out, she is a superstar after all. So it would have overtaken all other Suprabhatas at that point of time because it's
Hmm.
MS Subbulakshmi.
Her voice
So
is so good. I can still hear it right now when we're talking about it. But I've traveled to north of India. I've been to West Bengal, been to Delhi, been to
Hmm.
UP. I've never heard Suprabhat in or even my friends talking about Suprabhat being played at their home.
Yeah,
But in South India, if you just ask anyone, it's such a common thing. So I think traveling also like brings in that understanding or connects the dots. Okay,
it
this is
does. It does.
have you traveled across India and have you met different cultures within India that has inspired
I
you?
have lived. I have lived across India. I grew up in Dehradun, and then I grew up all over the world. Really, I grew up in Dehradun, then in Japan, then in Hyderabad, and then Kuwait and England and Geneva, and finally in the US, and then to Bombay, and now in Mysore. So it's my mother likes telling everyone that I started my schooling in Japan and ended it in the US. So one part of the world to the other.
That
So
explains a lot about your journey towards history because you've met so many teachers, right?
yeah,
You've interacted with so many different people, and the culture, I assume, would be very different in different parts of the world, like
yeah,
completely different. Like Japan would also have a similar culture like India, respect your elders, bow down.
true,
But if you move towards the West, I don't know how similar that is.
true.
Did you find
Not
anything
much. But
interesting in when you traveled across these cultures? That
well,
it's
I'll tell you about I remember because a lot of it happened in early childhood as well. And obviously I don't remember that. Japan, for example, happened when I was 3 years old.
hmm,
And I really don't have much memory except my only memory from Japan is getting scared of a person dressed as a monkey in Disneyland. So I can't tell you much about
yeah,
that.
can't say a lot about Japanese culture based on that.
No. So I don't know because a lot of there'd been cultural differences obviously everywhere. But the biggest I noticed was perhaps when I went to England because it was just me. I was 11 years old and I had been reading a lot of Enid Blyton at that time, and I wanted to go to boarding school. And my mother still has a very close friend from England, and she had always been corresponding with her to plan my higher education. This was never in the plan for my younger years because we couldn't afford it,
Hmm.
to be very honest. But then her friend sent over some tests just to I don't know, maybe I don't know really, but that ended up with me winning a scholarship to a school over there. So I went there, and I'm all on my own. I'm a 11-year-old kid, super confident, overconfident, and I had no idea what I was doing, obviously. But it was such a different world. There are little things that really strike you as cultural differences, not the large things. For example, when I went there, and this lady's daughter was supposed to be my guardian because her husband taught at the same school. And I was living with them for a few days before school started. And she asked me, "So, would you like water?" And I said, "Yes." And she gave me a glass of sparkling water. I'd never had it in my life. And I couldn't drink it. I still can't drink sparkling water, to be very honest. And these are the little things that really make you feel like a fish out of water because you have all the other kids over there uh, who have different sets of norms, and you have a completely different set of norms.
I
So, yes.
I agree with the
Yeah.
sparkling water. It's a very in Denmark. It's called danskevand. It means Danish water. Everyone drinks sparkling water. It's such a common drink in Denmark. Like if you go to the restaurants, they would offer you
Yeah.
sparkling water. There is always that
Yeah.
option. It is also available in India, but here it is so prevalent that people are not very like surprised, like you experienced.
Yeah.
The same goes with the coffee culture. It's also spread across India
Mm.
now, but when I was growing up, it was filter coffee or the coffee with like
Yeah.
sugar and milk. And when I came to Denmark, people were drinking black coffee and like
Yeah.
consuming black coffee was also something that was a similar experience, like you just mentioned on sparkling water. Like, how are they
Yeah.
doing it? I've grown into it. So I started drinking black coffee, and now
Yeah.
I always drink one. But yeah, there are like subtle differences that gets absorbed by your body when you start traveling. Um,
True. And it never stops. Recently, well, my husband's scared light. So when we got married and I happened to go visit his parents, now they have water with jeera and a few other things. That was very new to me as well. So it's not just from here to there, it's also from just here to here. It
India,
was just
India is like Europe
what are you saying?
as a country.
Yeah,
We
it
in Europe
is.
there's like many countries, but in India it's just so many cultures. Like I come from Bangalore, but if I travel
Yeah,
20 kilometers, I get a different culture, different
exactly.
food, different experience, different languages. So India is very unique
Exactly.
in that regards. Um,
It is.
moving to the topic I also like a lot, and I'm fond of it, is organic farming. Um, I know we have moved from history to organic farming, but I wanted to ask that question because I read that in your Medium bio, and I was like, this person knows
Ah,
everything. Let me just let me just
well,
ask.
explosive about nose.
Um, but what led you into organic farming?
Well, it wasn't me, to be very honest. So my mother has a PhD in environmental science. That's been her thing. And she always had this dream that when she retires, she is going to have an organic farm. So a long time ago, in fact, she bought a piece of farmland here in Mysore, and that was her retirement plan. That's what she wanted to do. So when I moved here in 2020, I well, it's very intriguing. So obviously I got very intrigued by it and I started. For the very first time, I'm a person who could have a cactus at home back then and still have that die. So there
I
was
can relate to
again, and my mother's the opposite. She has a green thumb. So I was very intrigued, and this was in the middle of COVID. On top of it, we all had a lot of free time in. So I started getting more and more into it. At the same time, my dad had opened a little salad bar, organic salad bar over here because there was so much farm produce and that we wanted to, uh, well, uh, the idea wasn't exactly to sell it at the beginning, but there has to be a way of distributing all that uh, produce. And so we started with that really, that salad bar, which didn't work. This is a different story altogether. So I started doing that, and then I started understanding the farm a little bit. Then I started realizing that, hey, I can actually grow things and they don't have to die if I grow them. So one thing led to the other, and it's uh, it's been a beautiful journey. I don't know what more to say about that really.
I mean, the word organic, because I realized it also in the COVID time that the food that we get here in Europe has a lot of standards. Like you can't add a lot of pesticides in it. Glyphosates are not allowed in Europe. And when I was reading about some articles in US, these are some pesticides that are allowed in US to be spread across the plants to kill pesticides and or sorry to kill insects, and that also the traces of it remains in the food or in the crops, and when you consume it, it enters into the body, which gets a very harmful reaction. And then I read about organic farming, wherein these things are not very or these things have not been introduced into organic farming, is what I have read. I
Yeah.
don't know. And that realized that we are kind of eating poison. Um, if we don't research about what food we are eating, we are eating poison. So organic farming is kind of a way in which we can come out of that loop, but not many. There are not many organic farmers in the world or across India. So it's a. I wanted to shout out in this via this podcast that
Absolutely.
organic farming is such a great cause or a great activity to do to get people into a healthier lifestyle.
In fact, to add to 2 points, in fact, to add to what you just said, uh, one there have been studies that have shown an increase of Parkinson's when with increased exposure to certain pesticides. In fact, I think France, I'm not very sure, but France has actually listed Parkinson's as an occupational disease for farmers.
Mm,
So, yes, there and there you do see in India that there are lots of Parkinson's is on the rise. Was something that was seen maybe in one or two people in a certain generation is seen across a lot more many people. It's not just Parkinson's. Parkinson's probably one of the most visible ones, and that's probably the one that gets most of the media attention as well, perhaps. There's a lot of occupational hazards when it comes to what I would call conventional farming, which is not organic farming. And in India, very interestingly, organic farming is very different from what it is in Europe, because we do have the lost art of certain agricultural practices. For example, you have Jivamrita, the making of Jivamrita or Panchagavya, which acts as both fertilizer and as a pesticide. You have the traditional, they used to use green chilies and ginger and garlic as pesticides for especially aphids.
okay.
And we use that in our farm, in fact. It works
Okay.
until they develop. You have to rotate it with something like neem oil, though, because they do develop an immunity to it over time. So you have to shock the system a bit from time to time. So there is a lot of organic farming in India goes hand in hand with seeing what used to be done and trying to replicate that. Because even back then, that did work.
Mm,
We have always had a population that has been on the larger side. It's never been as large as this. But if you compare it to other populations across the world, our population has always been on the larger end. And we have, for a lot of history, managed to feed that kind of population without pesticides, without your NPK, without your urea, without your weedicides or any of those sorts of things. And the trick, however, is to figure out how to do it again. Because the Green Revolution in India was so successful. If you ask farmers whose parents used to practice the same sort of the traditional organic farming, they don't know because the knowledge
mm,
has not been passed on. So that is the challenge with Indian organic farming at the moment. And very interesting thing is if you talk to any farmer, for example, who does large scale farming. Large scale farming is a very different thing from large scale farming in Europe. It's nowhere as large scale as Europe. But who does farming on a regular day-to-day basis and not just owning land. If you talk to them, who depends on farming as part of their livelihood, in fact, you would see that they grow a certain amount, grown in a certain way for the market, and they grow separately for their own family.
mm,
It's not a lack of ignorance over here.
mm.
because when it's not even that whatever they're growing for the family, they're growing in traditional methods. That's not even that. They're just growing, not looking at the yield, because they just want themselves to have good food. And
Mm.
yield at that point does not matter as much as it does for the larger scale that's meant for the market. And that's also given rise to a certain feeling that organic farming gives you very little yield, which it does compared to uh, conventional farming. But also, it does not need to be as little as we usually think it is.
No, that's
Now, yeah, please go ahead.
no, no, continue.
So, how much yield can organic farming truly give is something that we still need to see, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the field.
Mm.
Because we're starting to farm on a commercial level in an organic manner in India.
Mm.
We started some 15 years ago, really, not
Mm.
before that even. So
I
it's a
mean,
long way to go. We have to see
I
how it goes.
organic farming should be like there should be certain subsidies, or there should be
They
certain government
should.
benefits that to be given to the organic farmers, so that this movement.
They should.
It's also like there are movements in India, like Fit India movement is something that I've heard recently been spoken by the Prime Minister himself, right? And to
Yeah,
be fit, you just can't start running and be fit. You need to also consume
true,
good food, and that supports your
true,
fitness. So I would assume that to consume good food, you need to also have organic farming and raw products that are
true,
healthy in nature. Um,
true.
yeah. And if we go to the final point of the podcast, that would be people listening in Europe, if they want to visit India um, and learn about history or learn about Indian roots, are there any key places that you would recommend them to visit?
And that's a very tough question as well. Because if you really want to explore India, it takes months. I've always had this dream of taking a few months off and just going on a road trip across the country. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that, but if someone's able to, there's no better way to do it.
Mm.
Uh, Key places, I really can't think of any, to be very honest. But yeah, there are these megalithic uh, rock structures in a lot of South India, especially along Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka. And I don't think they're as they. I don't think a lot of people even know about it.
Mm.
And a lot of these megalithic structures are traditionally earlier. It used to be thought that these are all burials, but some of them seem to be some sort of a. Some of them seem to be solar calendars. Some of them seem to be lunar calendars. Some of them seem to be lunisolar calendars as well. So that is something that I believe there's a lot in northeastern India as well. Although I don't know much about those, but yeah, that's something that should be on your bucket list at some point or the other.
And my bucket list would be Kailash Temple, because I myself have not visited
Yes,
the
that
place.
definitely you should actually.
Yeah. No, with that, I think I would like to wrap this up, and I would like to thank you for sharing the knowledge, and also creating such a good content on your platform, on Instagram platform, Live, Laugh, Learn. Um, is there anything else that you would want to add, Anvita?
Nothing. Thank you so much for having me, for giving me this opportunity to speak. It was a lovely conversation.
Same here. This is also something new to me. I have never recorded a podcast in in Google Meet, so I will do. For all the listeners, if you think that there's something different, then you know why.